All right, I'm back here with number 9, the episode number 9 of Civics, questions worth asking. Because civics is not just memorizing the 3 branches of government, it's actually learning how power works and how rights are protected, how decisions get made, and what responsibilities come with living in a republic. I'm Matt Hasquin, a high school history, government, and civics teacher at a small rural public high school in south central Illinois. And today's question that's worth asking is, why is compromise necessary in a republic? President Gerald Ford was very famous for saying compromise is the oil that makes the engine of government go. And of course, that comes back from the mid 70s, but I've always been a big proponent of compromise. Not having compromise as the all-out goal of a situation, but always being ready to address, what's going on, knowing the other side that's coming at you as well. Because compromise is not always, especially in today's political climate, a real popular word. And to some people, compromise sounds like weakness. It sounds like giving in. And it actually sounds like you're abandoning your principles. And, sometimes that criticism, it's fair. But there are moments in history when compromise has protected things like injustice. Think about like the 3/5 compromise or the slave trade and commerce compromise. But also has, compromise has delayed necessary change, the Missouri Compromise, right? Where it's asked people to bargain away rights that should never be given up for debate in the first place. But we have to kind of be careful then when we address compromise, because not every compromise is good, and not every time you go to the middle ground is it always moral, and not every disagreement has 2 equally valid sides. But when we're talking about a republic, compromise is still necessary because people do not all think the same way. And they don't all live the same way or value the same things or need the same things from government. And so a republic is built for disagreement. And that is one of the most important things to understand when we look at it. Because the American system doesn't assume that citizens will agree on every major issue. In fact, it actually assumes the opposite, that we will disagree about taxes, and we will disagree about schools and public safety. We'll disagree about property and religion and speech and what happens in the courts, how the roads should be taken care of, and budgets that are put in place, immigration, healthcare, voting, and then the role of government itself. And so the question is not whether disagreement will exist. The question is, what do we do with it? And so in a republic, citizens don't vote directly on every law and every policy, right? It's a representative democracy. We elect representatives. Those representatives debate, negotiate, write laws, amend bills, build coalitions, and they try to turn disagreements into working decisions. And that process can be unbelievably frustrating. It can be slow and messy, but that's not always a flaw. Sometimes slowness is part of that protection. And so a system that requires compromise makes it harder for one person or one faction, one party, one region, or just one temporary majority to get everything it wants immediately. And that matters because a republic is not supposed to be a system where the winners get unlimited power and the losers get ignored. Of course, elections matter, majorities matter, but rights matter too. Minorities matter too. Minority opinion, majority opinion, that's what I'm talking about here. Institutions matter as well. And of course, the Constitution matters too. Compromise is one way a republic recognizes that public decisions affect people who do not all vote the same way. That doesn't mean every side gets exactly what it wants, because that's not how governing works. But it does mean that in a diverse country, governing usually requires listening, negotiating, and accepting that public policy often has to hold together more than just one interest at a time. And so we look at this, and this is obviously true at every level of government. Congress has to compromise to pass laws, and state legislatures have to compromise to pass budgets. County boards and city councils and school boards often have to compromise over taxes, roads, staffing, facilities, curriculum, public safety, and then just priorities within a community. So Most civic life is not made up of dramatic national speeches. It's made up of people trying to solve shared problems with limited money and limited time and different opinions about what matters the most. And that is where compromise becomes practical. It's easy to have perfect political purity, that's tough to say, when you do not have to govern. It is much harder when a road needs repaired, a school needs funded, or a budget needs to balance, or a courtroom actually has to function, or even a community has to decide what to do next. So compromise matters because government has to make decisions for people who disagree. But compromise also depends on something deeper. It depends on the belief that people who disagree with us still have a legitimate place in the political community. And that can be kind of difficult, especially in light of today's political times. This is especially true in a time when politics often encourage us to see our opponents as enemies. But a republic cannot survive if every disagreement becomes a fight for total victory. If every election is treated as the last election that should matter, if every opponent is treated as illegitimate, and if every compromise is treated as betrayal, then self-government starts to break down. A republic requires citizens and leaders who can say two things at the same time. They can say, I believe I am right, and I accept that people who disagree with me still have rights and representation and a voice. That is not weakness. That is self-government. And a free society should not compromise away basic rights. And it shouldn't compromise with corruption. It shouldn't compromise with political violence. It shouldn't compromise with the idea that some people are outside the protection of the law. But most public issues aren't that simple. Most involve trade-offs. How much money should the government spend? Who should pay for it? Which problems come first? Which level of government should act? How do we protect liberty and public safety? How do we respect local control and constitutional rights? How do we balance individual freedom with responsibility to the community? And those questions don't answer themselves because they require judgment. They require debate. And oftentimes, they require compromise. The founders understood this. The framers of the Constitution understood this, even if they didn't always live up to their own highest ideals. Because the Constitution itself was born out of compromise. It is a bundle of compromises. Representation in Congress, the powers of the national government, the relationship between large and small states, the process for amending the Constitution, the structure of the federal system, all resulted in difficult negotiations when you go back and look at the Constitutional Convention. And some of those compromises helped create a durable system of government. Like I said earlier, though, there were some of them that were just terrible decisions. So other compromises that did take place, especially those involving slavery, revealed deep moral failures that would eventually tear our country apart. And that history teaches an important lesson. That compromise is important in a republic, but it is not automatically virtuous. So the civic challenge that takes place here is knowing the difference between compromise that makes self-government possible and compromises that sacrifice justice. And that's not easy. But citizenship is not supposed to be easy. A republic asks citizens to care about principles, but also live with people who do not always share your priorities. So, it asks all of us to remember that winning every argument is not the same thing as building a functional society. So why is compromise necessary in a republic? Because disagreement's unavoidable. Power must be limited. Because no faction should ever get everything it wants. Because public decisions affect people on all sides. Because government requires more than slogans and sound bites. And so the real question is whether we can all tell the difference between compromise that weakens our principles and compromise that allows self-government to survive. And that is why compromise is necessary in a republic. And tonight, that was a civics question that was worth asking. In a remarkably long video, I'm right at the 10-minute mark. Sorry about that. I got a little long-winded tonight, but thanks for hanging around and watching.